And for more on this homegrown school feeding program, Andrew Mamedu, the country director of Action Aid Nigeria, joins us on Newsnight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, where have we gone wrong here? Because feeding pupils, particularly in primary school, is to attract enrollment and the rest. And even in Kaduna State, the pupils have been protesting, that they should bring the school feeding back. But some other school of thought will see it as, a squandered mania in all its facets. Do you agree? Does Action Aid agree?
Thank you very much for having me tonight. Good evening, Nigerians. So first of all, we need to note that school feeding, it's an investment for the nation. And Nigeria is not the first country. There are tens of countries that are into school feeding, and the benefits, we'll talk about the benefits later. So, but there are lessons that we have learned. In the recent time when we got into democracy, Obasanjo started the school feeding program, and the former President Buhari, late President Buhari, took it a notch higher with the social investment program. And so school feeding was a critical element where the target was to feed up to 7 million children across Nigeria. And it was a campaign promise. So it was a campaign promise to say that we will feed all primary school children. Of course, when the government came into power, they could not feed all children. They started with feeding primary 1 to 3, and primary 4 to 6 was left for the state governments to handle. But the state government say, we didn't make this commitment with you. We're not going to do this. So,
and how did that affect, enrollment into schools? Because I remember in some states, the pupils will just come, have the breakfast, and they go home, they abandon school, come back for lunch and the rest. So
first of all, we in some states like Kaduna, we saw enrollment increase by 28%. So currently we have figures up to 20 million children out of school, out of basic education. So now school feeding is one mechanism that would bring children back to school. It has positive, it has got negative. So when that happened, the classrooms were overcrowded, teachers were not enough to handle them. So all infrastructure was not enough to deal with it. And we even had children refusing to graduate because
the food is free.
Yeah, the food is for primary 1 to 3.
Yeah.
So I was in a primary school in Kaduna State, and the child says, "Oh, the next time, you're going to primary 4." I said, "No, I did not pass. I did not pass. Please do not promote me," because the child wanted to enjoy the school feeding program within that sphere. So, but we had just a few states, Kaduna, for instance, where the state government started the school feeding program even before the federal government took it over and started feeding the primary school. Same with Osun State. So we had a few states that were into this, but the benefits were enormous. We could see the benefit when it started, but something happened along the line. We had an issue. The issue we had during this
Buhari's administration, because it accelerated school feeding
the problem we had was during COVID, it became, I think it was politicized. At first, when it was in the office of the president, being managed by Ajah Mariam Uwais, it was a bit more transparent, it was a bit more open. Civil society were involved, citizens were involved, community members, leaders were involved. You could account for it. You could see egg, because the mandate was every child must get an egg in a week. At least one egg in a week. And you could see egg, they were aggregators, you could account for, you could trace the egg up to the children. But when it moved, then it started changing, and it got to a point where from one egg, you then had 4 children, in some states, 4 children sharing one egg. It was just a level of accountability. And of course, the funding was not enough then. It was 70 naira for a plate of food for a child. 70 naira could not do so much then. And the last time we fed was December 2022.
3 years ago.
Yes, December 2022. And then the money had increased from 70 naira to 100 naira. But I'm sure you know right now, 100 naira will not do it. So Action Aid currently is doing school feeding in selected locations. So in Taraba, we're doing school feeding, and we're using about 295, about 300 naira to feed a child, because the commodities coming from the community, the cooks from the community, so they are cheap. You're able to do that at 300 naira. And we're in collaboration, we're engaging and discussing with government. We hear that government is redesigning and coming up with how to relaunch the program, the school feeding program, so that, and the amount they're planning for is 325 naira, which is not far from what we are doing. That is fair enough, but we need to get value for that money. We need to make sure that one egg is one egg. Every child gets that one egg per week, and all of that.
The value would have to come first from agricultural production. And the farmers, are constrained by insecurity, particularly when you look at the farming communities in the northern parts of Nigeria, because of insecurity. And access to agricultural loans is a massive problem. How do you reconcile this? Relaunching the school feeding program, the height of inflation in the country, the cost of living generally.
We recognize that food inflation got up to 32, 33%. Yeah, food inflation got very high. We recognize that the federal government, your last guest, we're talking about the level of the actions the federal government is taking to deal with insecurity in the country. And the federal government recognizes that the insecurity is affecting food production generally. We work with smallholder farmers, and we work with about 2 million spread across the country. And three things they said are the topmost issues, the challenge they have. And number two is insecurity. One was inputs, loan and all of that. One was input and loan and all that. The second was insecurity. So if we deal with insecurity, definitely the cost of food will come down. The cost of production will increase, so it will be cheaper. However, we are looking at the local farmers, smallholder farmers, particularly smallholder women farmers who are in the community. Are they able to farm enough to be able to use for the school feeding program? This has several effects. The school feeding program, that's why it's multi-sectoral. It's not just, so it affects health, nutrition. When it comes to issues of stunted growth and all that, school feeding program deals with that. It, of course, education, enrollment, retention, even performance. It affects performance. The level of security. So you brought in the security dimension. So there are a whole lot of humanitarian issue as well. It's a social protection issue. Do not forget, we are saying that, the economy is bouncing back, because it seems like we are doing quite well, or we're beginning to do well in the macroeconomic level. We're beginning to see the inflation. The inflation is still there, but the level of inflation is reducing. The level of increase in inflation is reducing, right? So it's still there. We're beginning to see some macro figures giving us positive figures. However, people are still complaining at the grassroots that we're not seeing it. It's not impacting us. So for macro to impact micro, these are the kind of programs. School feeding program is a perfect example that how the micro will be impacted, how the community, the local people will be affected. But when it's relaunched, what are the lessons we have learned from the past that we are going to bring in here? There was an issue of corruption. Now, do not forget that why the program was shut down was because there was accusation of corruption.
Massive one.
So there was corruption and it was shut down. And that corruption occurred in the cash transfer, not in the school feeding program. But somehow the cash transfer has started. So we also need the school feeding program to commence. I can tell you for free. I work in the development sector, and I know a couple of programs that were involved in the school feeding program. But when there was a halt in that time till date, lots of them took their funds and left the country. I know of a program that had about $40 million, US dollars, committed to school feeding program, strengthening school feeding program mechanisms in the country. But they waited and waited for 1 year thinking that it's going to start, but it never started. And they took their fund and they left the country. So several issues that are associated with starting the school program. So the time to start it is now. We don't need to wait till 2026. There are inklings coming that, it's going to start in 2026. It sounds like it's political. Yeah. So you had a state governor, Kogi State? That was owing salary. But when it was a few months to election, he came and he paid backlog and paid all the. It's common. You see state governors doing that. But clearly, that's political. We should not politicize this. This is about children's life. It's about people that are feeding. I'll tell you a story before.
Okay, go on.
I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
About 3-4 months ago, a particular local NGO, we went there to do school feeding in FCT here. And this particular child, nice meal, protein on rice, protein, and fruits, watermelon. And the child took her food, and before like 3 minutes, the food was exhausted. Well, she just took it. I said, what happened? So I was passing by. I said, what happened to your food? She brought out a pack. She had kept about 3/4 of the food and said that my mom had asked me to bring this home for my brother and my sister. This is their food for the day. I'm not allowed to finish it. That is what the school feeding program was doing. It was catering for the needs of children, for feeding needs of children, of poor persons. So it's not about the middle and the upper class.
But that speaks of the poverty
level in the country. And that would really affect.
And another danger that maybe government and, civil society will have to look into is going to be the mass enrollment with dilapidated infrastructure, a lack of teachers, like you raised earlier. I wish we have all the time,
But before we wrap up, the state government and the local government needs to also come on board.
Absolutely.
The private sector, all the stakeholders will need to come on board to make this happen.
Absolutely. Thanks so very much. Dr. Andrew Mamedu is the country director, Action Aid Nigeria. Thanks for coming to speak to us on Newsnight.